Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Yeshua. I'm the Outreach and Social Media Coordinator for the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network. And on behalf of CCSN, I'd just like to thank you for attending today's webinar entitled Engaging Patients and Caregivers with Clinical Trials. If you're new to one of our webinars, let me just take a moment to give you a brief overview of our organization. The Canadian Cancer Survivor Network, or CCSN, is an organization working with cancer patients and survivors to learn about the complexities of our health system, connect with others to plan action, and act on those plans to promote better care and healthier survivorship. So if you'd like to learn more about CCSN, please visit our website at survivornet.ca. You'll find plenty of information there on us, as well as news, events, and other resources that we think you'll find helpful. Two quick announcements before I hand things off to our presenter. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available tomorrow on YouTube. The video link will be sent to the email you provided when registering. So you can share this resource or go back and watch it later again if you'd like. And at the end of our presentation, we will have a short Q&A session. However, you don't have to wait until the end to ask your questions. Feel free to type them into the window at the bottom right of your screen so we can have them queued up when our Q&A session comes up. So with that said, CCSN is pleased to welcome our presenter for today, Dawn Richards. She is the founder of 502 Labs Inc. and Director of Patient and Public Engagement at Clinical Trials Ontario. And in this role, she's charged with executing on CTO's strategic pillar of patient and public engagement. So it's my pleasure to hand things off to her.
Thanks, Yeshua, and good morning or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar from wherever you're dialing in for across these beautiful unceded territories that we all are grateful and thankful to live and work on. I'm going to share a brief land acknowledgement from where I am here in Toronto. So I acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And as I mentioned, I am very grateful and thankful to live on these territories. So I'm just going to share some slides with you to get us going here. Okay. So as Yeshua said, I'm here representing Clinical Trials Ontario today, where I'm the Director of Patient and Public Engagement. Also wanted to share with you that I'm a patient too, not a cancer patient, but I live with both rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. So I bring a slightly different perspective maybe to my role than other individuals might. Okay, so in today's presentation, in case you're not familiar with CTO or Clinical Trials Ontario, I'll tell you a little bit about it. I'm going to spend the bulk of today's discussion or presentation going through some resources that we have co-created with patient partners. We're going to start off the first half with basic information about clinical trials and where you might find a clinical trial if you're interested in that. And so that's in the kind of bucket of I'm interested in being a research participant. The second half of the talk is really about being a patient partner on a clinical trial team. So not as a research participant, but bringing lived experience, knowledge, and expertise to a clinical trial team. And I'll make sure that that's clear when we're going through things. And as Yeshua indicated, feel free as I'm going through things to type any and all questions into the chat box or the question box. And I'm happy to have a conversation at the end about things. I'll also share my email information with you. So I'm always happy to have a chat offline or have people contact me if during the presentation you don't think of something, but you think about it afterwards. Okay, so we're going to start with me setting the stage about Clinical Trials Ontario, or CTO. CTO is primarily supported by Ontario's Ministry of Colleges and Universities. You can read our vision and mission here, but really we've been put in place to help make Ontario a better place to do clinical trials. It's kind of that simple. This year is our 10th anniversary also as an organization. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that while we are an Ontario-based organization, everything that I'm going to share with you here about clinical trials or finding clinical trials is applicable to trials all across Canada. So all of the rules and regulations are set out by our regulator, Health Canada, which oversees clinical trials all across Canada, not just within Ontario. So it's important for you as a national audience to know I'm not just speaking from an Ontario perspective here. So what do we do to make Ontario a better place to do clinical trials? We have 3 strategic pillars that are on this slide here. One is to streamline the processes related to doing clinical trials. So still allowing high quality of clinical trials, ethical clinical trials to happen, but with streamlining some of the processes that can be very laborious. So in the 10 years since CTO has been established, we've done a lot of work, especially around streamlining the research ethics review of multi-center trials and observational studies. And if you don't have insights into what that process is like, basically the streamlined process can really help save a lot of work and time for multi-center clinical trials and observational studies, just having one central ethics package that needs to go in instead of an ethics package for each different site that the clinical trial or observational study is at. Next, I'm going to flip over to the promote pillar. The promote pillar is really about promoting Ontario as a place to do clinical trials. So we have great clinical trial infrastructure in Ontario. We have highly qualified personnel who conduct clinical trials. We have a very diverse population. And so those are all things that make Ontario an attractive place to do clinical trials. And then lastly, the engage pillar here in the center is the pillar that I support within Clinical Trials Ontario. And my role and the role of the engage pillar is really to support and promote public and patient engagement with clinical trials. And we use the term with, really purposefully here. It's about that two-pronged approach that I'll talk to you about today. It's helping support people make decisions about participation in a clinical trial or to not participate, but it's about helping them make an informed decision based on credible information. And the second prong of engaging with clinical trials could be as a patient partner on a clinical trial team. So that's a little bit about CTO as an organization. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about, as I mentioned earlier on, is basic information about clinical trials and where you might find a clinical trial if you are interested in exploring that possibility. I mentioned earlier in the talk that I really want to emphasize that everything I do within the Engage pillar at CTO is in collaboration with patients as partners. So all of the resources that you're going to see here today have been co-created with patients as partners. And we engage people in developing these resources in different ways. So one, we have a group that we work with really closely that's called our College of Lived Experience. These are about 25 people from all across Ontario who bring different perspectives based on where they live. They might live in a dense city center, they might live in a northern community based on their age. So they have different life experiences based on their different health conditions. And some of them have been in clinical trials and others are just really interested in clinical trials and research. So everything that I do, I somehow engage our College of Lived Experience. In fact, just this morning, I had a workshop with some college members about a project that we're working on together. The other group that we lean on heavily, and the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network is part of this group, is patient organizations and health charities. So they also bring different perspectives to us based on what their community tells them, what their needs are, and again, the different diseases or conditions that they help serve communities with. So these are the different groups and the different organizations that we really rely heavily on, and we're very grateful for that they provide us with all kinds of lived experience and input into the resources that I'm going to talk to you about today. So next, as I mentioned, the resources that I'm going to be talking about in the first half of the talk are really related to you considering research participation, or just generally research participants. So just to be really clear about that, research participants are individuals who provide their consent to participate in a research study, and their consent is voluntary. It's entirely up to them if they would like to be in a clinical trial or not. They do make a really personal decision to participate, in this case, in clinical trials. And, part of that decision-making process is weighing potential benefits and risks about the clinical trial. Important to know, too, that as volunteers, they can withdraw at any time from a clinical trial for any reason. There may be some processes that they have to undergo to withdraw, and that might be in the name of keeping them safe in terms of when they withdraw from a specific study. There may be some questions that they're asked to answer, although they don't have to give a reason for their withdrawal. And they might even ask for their data and any samples that they provided to be withdrawn. So I just want to make sure that it's really clear that the resources that we're going to talk about next are just related to being a research participant in a clinical trial. So next, what I'm going to do, and fingers crossed that technology is on my side today, I'm going to take you to our website, and we're basically going to take a look at some of the resources together that we built and that are available for you. So this is a screenshot of the website. It's www.ctontario.ca. And I also wanted to let you know that the resources that we have that are available for patients in the public are available in both English and French. Like I said earlier, everything that's available here is applicable to trials all across Canada. So I'm briefly going to stop sharing just while I head on over to my internet browser. So just bear with me for 1 minute. And I'll pull it back up again. Okay, so here we go. This is what the home page of the CTO website looks like. And as I mentioned, everything in our patient and public web pages are available in English and French. There are some options up at the top of the screen in terms of patients in the public, so the upper right-hand corner. The first resource that I'm going to take you to is a number of web pages around just learning more generally about clinical trials. So when I click on this, you'll see a number of different options across the screen here. And this, as I mentioned, and I'll continue to mention, we developed this with patient partners, and they told us, yeah, I want to go to a site where I can find reputable and credible information about clinical trials. And I've got all these different questions, but I think the best way to navigate it would be where I am in my decision-making process. So for example, if you go over to the very left-hand side of the screen, this is just, I want to learn more about clinical trials. And it's fairly intuitive in terms of helping show you via color that this is the section that you're on. And this is the section that's just going to provide you general information about participation, about what trials are, etc. So as you scroll down the site, and each page is a little bit different. Some of them have videos though. So this is Dr. An Wen Chan, who's a dermatologist in Toronto. And he basically provides an overview of clinical trials in this brief video. As you keep scrolling down the site, for each of the pages, we basically got a list of common questions that we brainstormed with our partners. And then you can just click on each one and it's kind of accordion style in terms of an answer to that question. So it ranges everything from what are clinical trials, what kinds of health interventions are studied, like why are they even done, where are they done, how do I know that a clinical trial is reputable or credible, and actually within this specific section, we've got another video of Miss Sharon Freitag, who is with Unity Health in Toronto, and she talks here about the research ethics process and why it exists. And then she also talks about in another video what the Research Ethics Board does and what their role is. So sprinkled throughout these questions and responses, you may find some videos as well. So continuing down, what are the phases of clinical trials? What's randomization? What's informed consent? What's a clinical trial protocol? So, maybe you've decided, okay, I've learned quite a bit about what trials are. I might be interested in actually looking for a clinical trial. So you would just click on that section. And then again, there's a number of common questions that we've brainstormed with partners who we've worked with. And again, you can just click on each of these and read the text. And then some of them will also have some videos for you. And you can continue throughout, maybe you found a trial and you're wondering what kinds of questions you should ask or how your participation might affect you. And maybe you're actually in a clinical trial and you've got some questions about what that looks like. And then maybe, you're interested in when you finished a clinical trial, the different types of things you might be interested, like the results of the study or how this might impact your medical care if you're continuing to seek care, etc. So basically, lots of different questions, lots of different sections for you to look at, really based on where you are in your overall thought process related to clinical trials, or hey, maybe you're just interested in all of those topics, and this is a good resource for you to check things out. So that's the first resource that I wanted to share with you, is just a lot of information about clinical trials generally, if you're new to it, or if you're a little bit more engaged. Also under the Patients and Public tab, there's a clinical trial term glossary. So that might be helpful with you for you as you're learning more about clinical trials. So same kind of idea and layout. There's information about, what adverse events are, what bias means, what efficacy means, what informed consent means, what intervention means, all those types of things that, and maybe that's enough for you, is just seeing the glossary and understanding what some of these words are. The other thing that I did want to show you within this area, in case you are interested in finding a clinical trial, is our clinical trial finder, which you can see here. So this is a search tool that we have created. It actually searches a database which many of you may be familiar with. It's called clinicaltrials.gov. So it's a database out of the US, but it's a global clinical trial database. But many people find it overwhelming and difficult to navigate. So what we've done in our clinical trial finder is we built a much easier to use interface. We've also got a video on the site in addition to word-based instructions. We've got a video here from one of our College of Lived Experience members who herself is a brain tumor survivor, and she navigates through, within a few minutes, how you can use the clinical trial finder, which is basically what I'm going to do with you here now. So we heard from people, you know, at the very minimum, I want to search my condition and maybe location, maybe a couple of other things. So that's what you'll see on the left-hand side here is the different things that you can put in. And at the very least, you do have to put in a condition that you're interested in. So just as an example, I'm going to put in breast cancer. And it's really up to you whether or not you also input these other search criteria. So one is location, and I just want to show you what that looks like. That by default, it does search Ontario, but you can search within a few or a few hundred kilometers of your specific postal code. You can also search any province or territory in Canada, or you can search all of Canada. Right now, we don't have it outside of Canada, but that's something that we're considering. It would be fairly easy to do, and we've heard from some people that that would be useful. So I'm in Ontario. I'm just going to search Ontario for now. You can put in study phase if you're interested in that. Some people, you know, wouldn't make a difference. You can also put in your demographics from if you're a healthy volunteer, your age, your biological sex. Again, it's up to you. And we've heard from people that sometimes additional keywords might be useful to search too. But I'm just going to kind of go with the bare minimum here by putting in breast cancer, keeping it to Ontario, and then you basically just hit search. And it might take a minute or two to pop up results. Okay, and so here we go. We've got a number of results that are returned. In fact, related to breast cancer, there are, at this moment, not yet recruiting or recruiting studies. That's all that our finder searches on clinicaltrials.gov. There are a total of 84 studies that have been found. There's little buttons here in case you want to share it with a Facebook group or you want to share it on Twitter, or maybe you want to print it out and share it with a family member or your healthcare provider. So those buttons are up on the top right-hand corner. And then basically what comes back is a numbered list of potential clinical trials, along with, so the title of the study, the disease or condition that it covers, the study phase, the locations, and they're either recruiting or not yet recruiting. And it might be helpful for you to know, when the trial started, the date that the information was posted, and the date that the information was last updated. A caveat is that our data is only as good as what investigators and sponsors upload into clinicaltrials.gov. So you'll see in the second result here that there are no centers that are listed, and that is because they were not listed in the original listing. But you'll see a number of other ones do. So let's just say, okay, I'm in Toronto. I see that there is this study on a non-invasive artificial intelligence-based platform monitoring program, cleverly called NIPIT, at Princess Margaret Cancer Center. It's not yet recruiting, but I'd like to learn more information about this. So this is what happens when you click on a study that you might like to look at in more detail. This is the information that comes back. And again, it's like a lot of the other information on our website, that there's this accordion style of information. So it's fairly clean. It's not overwhelming in terms of just seeing a big block of text. Again, on the upper right-hand corner, you might share it on social media, or you might print it out. And if you hit the print button, it'll print out everything on the page. And so, you can see, again, the conditions that are covered. You want a bit more information about the study itself, like the summary, the purpose, the detailed description. That's what's provided here. You can look at the recruitment information and eligibility. So, who would be included in it. And it's not yet recruiting, but you could keep your eye on this. Or the other thing that you might choose to do is when you take a look at location and centers, as well as additional information, here there's actually a contact that's listed. And this is a great example because there's actually a phone number and there is an email. Not all of them have that, unfortunately. But even though it's not yet recruiting, if you wanted more information about this study, you could contact Alyssa Nugent, whose information is listed here, either in email or phone, and you could ask whatever questions that you might have about the study. So that's just a brief overview of our clinical trial finder. And again, you can have, there's lots of information you can glean from this. The other thing that didn't show up here because, oh, sorry, it did show up here, is if you'd like to subscribe to be contacted at a later date, if additional information were to come up, you can actually enter your email address. So you can get updates from time to time if you are willing to leave your email address and agree to leave it. And then you can subscribe for updates at a later date. And this was a feature that we just added after we released the clinical trial finder that many people told us it would be beneficial to have a subscribe button. The last thing that I would like to show you within this section under patients in the public is that I also know that sometimes you maybe don't just want to read a bunch of information like we've got listed here, but maybe you'd like it in a slightly more digestible way, which might be a blog. And here we've got information about our Talk Clinical Trials campaign. And actually, just a plug that International Clinical Trials Day is coming up next Friday, May 20th. It's on May 20th every year. And we're going to be hosting a Facebook Live event to celebrate. And this year we will be talking about participation in COVID-19 studies. And we'll have a caregiver and a clinical trial participant with us at that event. So we've generally got information here about International Clinical Trials Day. But what I wanted to show you is our blog. And our blog features all kinds of information, sometimes from people who themselves are, have been in clinical trials or live with different conditions. So this one in the top middle, Alyssa's experience. Alyssa Vito is a breast cancer survivor, and so she talks about her experiences with breast cancer and with research. You can see Dr. An Wen Chan is here again, and this highlights some of the videos that he's done for us. And a little bit further down here on now the top right-hand corner, we were fortunate to get a blog from Dr. Carol Legaret from the Office of Clinical Trials at Health Canada. And she talks about the role of Health Canada, or our regulator, with respect to clinical trials. So we've got all kinds of perspectives and experiences here related to clinical trials that might be helpful for people who are considering clinical trials, or just might be useful for you also to learn more about clinical trials. Okay, so I'm going to just stop sharing that part of my screen, and I'm going to go back to my slides. So this is where we left off in the slides with the website and kind of the tour of the website, so to speak. So we went over the sections that have general information related to clinical trials. I showed you a bit about the clinical trial finder, and good for you to jump on there and search a bit for yourself. Also happy to get any feedback from you, because we are continuously updating the trial finder based on feedback from people that we work with all the time, plus other people who have used the finder and would like to give us constructive feedback about their experiences. And then we talked about the clinical trials blog. So lots of ways for you to learn lots of information from our website. The second half of the talk I'm going to focus on, as we discussed way earlier on in my talk, is engaging on a clinical trial team. So we're going to shift gears a bit. This is not about being a research participant now, but this is about bringing your own experiences, maybe with your own cancer experience or that of a loved one, to a clinical trial team. So for the next part of the talk, I'm not going to be talking about patients as research participants. I'm going to be talking about patients or caregivers who are providing their lived experiences and perspectives to a research team. And they bring, their own expertise of navigating the system, of living with a disease or condition day in and day out. And that really is on par with the scientific and medical expertise that others on the research team bring. And please don't downplay how important lived experience is and how important it is to bring to a research team to change how research is done and to build clinical trials that are more relevant to patient needs and to them. So really important for you to think about. We believe strongly in that we can build more relevant clinical trials that are filling gaps that patients identify by working with patients as partners. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. I'm going to go back to the website. And again, I think that's probably more useful than just showing some static screenshots for you. What I'm going to walk you through next is some decision aids that we built as part of a research team that's been led by Dr. Monica Perry out of the University of Toronto. That research team has also included other researchers and clinicians, as well as trainees, so students, and patient partners too. You may be familiar with decision aids in a healthcare sense. That's usually where you hear about decision aids. Decision aids have been created to help patients and their healthcare providers make decisions about healthcare. And so we basically created this so-called patient engagement decision aid, kind of modeling what a healthcare decision aid looks like. So I'm going to go back to our website now to show you where the decision aids are. So here we are, and if we go back to our home page, the decision aids are really easy to find under the home page, under patients and public, and under decision aids for patient partner engagement. So this is the home page. We've created two decision aids. We've got one that's created for patient partners, and we've got a second one that's created for investigators or sponsors. So the people who are planning, designing, and doing the actual study. So I'm going to walk you through the patient decision aid, since that seems to make the most sense here. But they're really parallel. They provide a lot of the same information, just tailored to a different perspective. And you'll see that the look and feel of the decision aid is much like the other parts of our website that I walked through with you today. So there's 5 sections here. There's a bit of an intro blurb, which I'll spare you on. And then you basically go through the decision aid if you'd like to do that. And at the end of the decision aid, it helps you decide, are you ready to be a patient partner on a clinical trial team? Or are there some areas and maybe some skills that you could read up on or learn a bit more about before you're ready to take on the task of being part of a clinical trial team? So let's start at the beginning. Obviously, there's this introduction piece. And this is really about foundational groundwork related to patient engagement and research, related to what clinical trials are, etc. So if you scroll down the site, there's a bit of a blurb that I talked to you about already about decision aids. And then there's a number of FAQs and responses. So, obvious one, like why would I use this decision aid in the first place? Sounds pretty simple, but there are specific definitions of patients that some funding organizations like the Canadian Institutes of Health Research use. And so we lay that out in the who are patients. And in their case, patients may be individuals themselves that live with a health condition or have a healthcare experience, but they can also be caregivers and they can also be family and friends. I'm sure many of you know that family and friends, live through an experience of a health condition, but they bring a different lens, and that lens is just as important to the research team as those who live with that condition as well. So there's information on what clinical trials are. There's information about how patient partners can contribute to this type of research. And we've got some videos here from our patient partner, and then a couple of others from patient partners across the country. And then we've also got some videos from researchers who talk about how patient partners can contribute to being members on a research team. And then we talk about, what might some of your motivations be, potential roles, the concepts of having your expenses reimbursed and even being paid for your role on the research team, time commitment. And an important thing that carries throughout the decision aids are these so-called levels of engagement. And this is what's called the International Association for Public Participation spectrum. And so basically when patients are part of a research team, they can be engaged in, all the way up to making decisions. So being empowered, that's the empowered level over here on the right-hand corner. Or maybe it's way down here at inform, where they're just told about what's happening and they might be asked a few questions once in a while. But this spectrum is going to be used throughout the decision aid to help you make decisions about how you might wish to be a patient partner on a research team. So I just wanted to highlight it for you here. So as I mentioned, this introductory part is really, like I said, laying the foundation for some of the terms that you might hear if you're part of a research team, more about clinical trials and how research works, some of the ways that you might be part of a team. So, maybe that's enough for you, right? Maybe you're just interested in learning that type of thing, but maybe you have been asked to be a patient partner on a clinical trial team, or maybe you're interested in exploring this further. So the next section is my priorities. And the my priorities section really asks you to sit back and think about the different ways you might want to be engaged in a research team. So these are not listed in any specific order because part of the exercise is you're asked to rank these about where you feel like you would most like to be involved in a research team. So dissemination right now is up top, which would be helping share information about the study, helping share results of the study, might be in a publication, might be at a conference. Maybe it's identifying and prioritizing the actual research question that's explored. Maybe it's about helping the researchers work on a grant proposal to get it funded. And maybe it's about looking at the data. So basically, you'll be asked to go through this exercise of like which ones of these are most important to you, and you can rank them. So I'm just going to go through a hypothetical here that, okay, I'm really interested in dissemination. That's actually my number one. The second is I would like to be really involved in developing the grant proposal. And so you can basically change the order of these, and the decision aid is going to remember that as you continue going through them. Next, you know what? I'm really interested in analyzing and interpreting the data if this thing gets funded. So I'm going to move that to the top. And right now I'm just going to be concerned with my top three. So one is dissemination, sharing results from the data, or sorry, from the research study. developing the grant proposal if it's not already funded, and then contributing to analyzing and interpreting the data. The next part is, I'll ask you to recall on the last page, we looked at the levels of engagement and how would I like to be engaged in these different top 3 priorities. So for dissemination, I'm going to go, you know what, I'd like to collaborate with the team on that. I think it'd be really cool to give presentations with them, to be part of the writing team if they develop a paper. For developing the grant proposal, well, I'm not an expert there, so I'm going to go with consult. That's lower down the list. And analyzing and interpreting the data, you know what, I want to be right in there again, so I want to collaborate on that. So once you've filled that out, you're basically asked to just kind of think about that and keep that in the back of your mind while you go to the Learn More section. The Learn More section talks to you a lot about the research process itself. And within these different areas of the research process, there are different FAQs again. So different roles you might have on the team, you know, what it's like to be part of a research team and asking for help if you need it, some of the things you should expect in terms of communications, evaluating your experience, a little bit more about sex and gender and why those are important to be looked at in research. And like I checked off that I want to be included in the dissemination activities, which might be writing a paper with the research team. So I'd be really interested in learning more about that. So this section of Learn More kind of helps you dive in to the areas that you prioritized in your My Priority section. And that helps you understand a bit more about things and if you really feel like those are the areas you want to be engaged in. The next 2 are pretty fun because they're interactive. And this is, if we go to My Readiness, this is where it's going to ask you, so it brings up what your priorities are. My top 3 were dissemination, developing the grant proposal, analyzing and interpreting data. So it's brought them up as my top 3 and it's left the others in the order I left them. Next, you might recall that for my top 3, I said I wanted to collaborate with dissemination, I wanted to just be consulted on the grant proposal, and I wanted to collaborate on analyzing and interpreting data. And you know what? Having done the Learn More, I'm going to stick to those levels of engagement. I'm going to keep them. But what you could do is you could change them if you decided, you know what, I just want them to tell me about the grant proposal. I don't really want to be super involved, so I'm going to put it down to inform. And you know what, I've had another thought. Maybe I don't have a ton of time right now for analyzing and interpreting data, so I'm going to drop that down to just the involve section also. So with that, then you take a readiness quiz. And this has remembered my previous answers, but basically you go through, and again, it's asking you to reflect on what you've learned on and what you think your priorities would be being part of a research team. And you'll answer a few questions. So 1 being, I strongly disagree, and 5 is, yeah, I really agree strongly with the statement. So yeah, I think I'll be able to provide insights. I'm gonna agree with that. I think I'll be able to inform the study design and the materials that are given to participants. I'm not sure, I'm not gonna strongly agree that I'll be able to help do the actual research. And I don't know this team very well, so I'm gonna put in the middle here about talking to the research team if I'm super concerned about something. I do know I'll be able to suggest ways to recruit people to the study or provide them with some tips. And yeah, I think I'll be able to provide some insights. And I'll definitely be able to help provide summaries of the research. And there's a few other questions here. So basically it tells me I'm likely to be ready because I agree or strongly agree with most of these in the quiz that's asked me to reflect. And then it tells me to go to my decision. So this is kind of the final area of the decision aid. And again, it's asking you to reflect on your readiness quiz results, where it told me I'm likely to be ready. And then you go through just a few more questions, just like a decision aid would be in healthcare, where you reflect on some additional questions. So I won't go through all those, but basically, you know what, I'm pretty confident in my answers at this point. And my decision results would be you're ready to be a partner on a research team. And at the end of this, we've listed some of the organizations that you can either contact, or you could contact me at CTO, and I would be able to help you potentially find an organization that you might be able to work with if this is of interest to you. So that was pretty long-winded, but again, the decision aid is really there to help prepare you to be a patient partner on a research team, to help you reflect on a number of things related to, again, bringing your perspective to a research team. So I'm going to go back to the slideshow just to wrap up before we have time for a few questions. So that was our decision aid. The last thing that I want to show you is that the CCSN also has a great resource that's freely available for anyone. It's called The Science of Cancer, and it's a free online course. And CTO has been involved in creating one of the modules. Much of the information comes from our Learn More About Clinical Trials section, but we also have information there for you about being a patient partner on a clinical trial team. So feel free to go to the survivornet.ca site, and you can check out a number of different courses there. I just wanted to highlight this specific module that we've been fortunate to be involved with at CTO. So just to wrap up, I told you I'd leave my email address. You're more than welcome to contact me at dawn.richards@ctontario.ca at any time. It doesn't have to be right after this talk. Have it in your back pocket if you have any questions. And I'm going to close there, and happy to take any questions that have come in through the chat, or that you've got just off the top of your head at this point now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can hopefully see me, and Yeshua and I will have a chat now.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly insightful and really helpful to go through the website as opposed to just going through slides, like you said. So that's great. We've got questions starting to come in here, but maybe we'll start with some of the ones that you and I had discussed earlier. Primarily, you did mention that you are in Ontario, but again, we just want to ask, like, is this stuff exclusively, like the stuff you're talking about, is it exclusive to Ontario residents, or other people as well?
Yep, so I get that question all the time, and I want to reinforce that everything that I talked today about clinical trials or being a patient partner on a research team, that's applicable all throughout Canada. Again, important to know that clinical trials are regulated by our federal regulator, Health Canada. So everything I talked today about clinical trials in general is applicable all through Canada. And I actually should just reinforce to Yeshua that, again, our patient and public web pages are all available in English and French. The clinical trial finder, though, is a bit tricky because the results do come from an English-only database. And in our consultations with francophones or people who are bilingual, they said, please don't use, you know, an artificial intelligence translator. They're really not that good. So what we'd prefer you to do is what we've done, which was we built the homepage for the clinical trial finder in French. And we basically explain it's pulling from an English website, but all of the headers that we provide back and anything that's within our control is in French. but unfortunately the results do come back in English. So we just wanted to find the best way that we could deal with that people felt would meet the needs of our national audience, and that's what it was.
Thanks. That's great to clarify for all of our, like you said, francophone or bilingual viewers. How can we know if a clinical trial is credible or legitimate?
That's a good question too. I get this question a lot. A few things you can look for in clinical trials when you're judging about, is this one the right one for you, or does it appear trustworthy? So first of all, you may have some costs associated with your participation that would be out of pocket. They might include, taking time off work to be able to go to the clinical trial site or visit. They might be parking, they might be food associated with the day, but please know that you should not be asked to pay for the study treatment. You shouldn't be asked to provide, like an entrance fee payment or anything like that. The other things you can look for to help you out is you can look at the trial team. So, like what are their credentials? Have they been working in this area for a long time? Do they seem to have the appropriate expertise? The other things you can look at too is, has the clinical trial been reviewed and approved by a research ethics board? That's really important. Has it been reviewed by Health Canada? That is also important. Has it been reviewed by the institution or the site at which it's occurring? And you can ask those questions to make sure that you feel confident that other and appropriate bodies have reviewed the clinical trial and okayed it, so to speak. So those are a few things to look at when you're making your decision about a clinical trial.
That's great. One question we have here is there any data available on the efficacy of your website? I'm not entirely sure what is getting at there, but
that's a good question for a so-called evidence-based organization, right? I think you win like best question ever. So a couple of things, this might not answer your efficacy question per se, but we do know that many people are using the website. So one thing to know is that, for example, the clinical trial finder has been up and running for 3 years at this point. And it is getting thousands of hits per month. Some of the hits are coming from patient organizations and health charities, and many of the hits and visits are simply coming from organic Google searches. So we know it's coming up high in the search engine and people are using it. Unfortunately, I don't have the data to tell me whether or not people join studies based on searching the clinical trial finder, or what kinds of outcomes they had if they did join studies. We also know that people are definitely using, the other features of our website, like the learn more, etc. But again, those aren't necessarily related to efficacy. Like, okay, they've read the learn more, but what are they retaining? And how is that helping them find or better participate in clinical trials? So that's a tricky question to answer, and I know I haven't exactly answered it to a T, but I hope that's helpful, that we know that people are definitely using the resources and the site. And we do take all feedback really seriously. So like I mentioned, if there's something on the site that you feel should be changed or you think can be made to better serve our community, we are more than happy to hear from people. So please keep that in mind.
Thanks. Another question here says, it seems finding funding to run a trial at treatment centers is often a problem for rare diseases. Is there anything patient support groups can do to help with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Funding is always, we talked about that too within being a patient partner on a team, and the fact that you may be engaged or involved in a grant proposal to raise fund to try and get this study funded. So I guess that's a tricky question for me to answer. I think that sometimes it's important to have the voice that, and like you said, rare disease patients, for example, having the voice that these types of research studies are needed, and finding ways to appropriately advocate to funding bodies or other agencies or policymakers about that need, that can be very effective. The other thing too is, simply understanding who is doing research in your area and making connections with those particular clinicians or researchers, and finding out how you can help them, whether that's being patient partners, whether that is helping disseminate information about their studies or what it looks like. So again, I apologize if I'm kind of weaving around here. I can't tell you exactly how to go and advocate for additional funding, but making your voice heard and making the lived perspective heard about the need for that, and helping researchers also understand the gaps that you are living with in terms of living with that disease and what types of research you feel does need to happen, are really important ways that you can use your voice to change research.
Yeah, it's so difficult to answer specific questions on broad topics, right? Like it seems one of those things where it's such a case by case basis, particularly with healthcare and particularly with just all the variations of cancer in our case, CSN, and how it affects each person. We have one last question here, potentially. Should we be worried that most phase 1 clinical trials in cancer do not benefit patients? This in turn, it's a bit of a longer paragraph, so I'll reread it and read the rest of it. Should we be worried that most phase 1 clinical trials in cancer do not benefit patients? This in turn means that your patient partners are biased. By that, they mean that those who have had bad experiences with trials are either not likely to volunteer to be partners, or they may have gone, they may have passed away or something like that. So how do we, or how do you and the partners deal with that?
I think I do think that part of it is around education, and people do have to know that different types of clinical trials are designed to answer different questions. So they are designed very specifically to gather specific evidence about things. And unfortunately, it's sometimes it's about safety, right? Which phase 1 studies are usually about is safety and a bit of dosing information. And always, throughout clinical trials, we're looking at side effects. So it's partly a factor of what the clinical trial has been designed to do, and importantly, does it give us the evidence for that so it can potentially move on to the next phase of that clinical trial. I think that's probably the best I can answer without a whole lot more context, but part of it is just us knowing, what the trial was designed to do and how it may potentially benefit or not benefit the participants of the study. Those are important things to know going into the actual study itself.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. Thank you so much for clarifying that. And maybe one last one here. What kinds of questions should we be asking, or who should we be talking to when it comes, like if we're interested in participating in clinical trials?
So if you do find a trial that you are interested in, we do have a list of potential questions that we brainstormed with our own partners on our website. But you may ask a number of things like, what does my participation look like? How much time might it take? How far might I have to travel? What's involved in terms of sample collection, in terms of providing data and other information? Is there a possibility that I might receive a placebo? I know we get that question a lot. How long might the study last? You might be interested in how many other people are in the study. But those are all things you can ask the clinical trial team that's running the study. They'll have all of those types of answers for you. The potential benefits and risks are also big ones that we often get. That should be, well, those will be listed. The ones that are potentially known will be listed in the informed consent paperwork. But again, you know, between the informed consent, if you get to that stage, and the clinical trial study team, you should be looking to get all of your answers before you feel confident about making your decision. And you should feel free to continue to ask those questions until you feel like you've got the information to make your decision.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Dawn Richards for joining us today for this incredibly insightful and informative presentation, and for all the work you do with clinical trials, not just in Ontario, but around the country. We really appreciate you taking the time of being with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us on today's webinar. This is one in a series of webinars that we have planned for 2022. Registration information for our next webinar will be out soon, so watch your inboxes for that, and social media feeds as well. Just one quick note about email. If you're not seeing our emails in your inbox, please check your junk or spam mail folders, as we use a third-party email service. So please check your spam folders and mark emails from CCSN as safe, so they come directly into your inbox, and that'll ensure that you don't miss any of our newsletters or webinar signups or anything like that. As always, all of our previous webinars are accessible on demand through our website at survivornet.ca/webinars. So again, we'd like to thank you for attending today, and great thanks to Dawn Richards for joining us. Enjoy
Thanks,
your day,
everyone.
everyone.